Imagine it's 1915. You're a young man in Britain. Perhaps you're just out of school or you're in your first job. The world is at war, and the air is thick with that mix of apprehension and excitement. Everywhere you look, there are posters urging you on to enlist, to do your part, to be a hero. You pick up the morning paper, and your eyes catch a poem. Who's for the game, the biggest that's played, the red crashing game of a fight? Who'll grip and tackle the job unafraid, and who thinks he'd rather sit tight? Those words leap off the page, and they challenge your courage, and they appeal to your sense of adventure. War isn't portrayed as a grim ordeal, but the ultimate game, a test of manhood, a chance for glory. As you read on, one line catches your eye. Who would rather come back with a crutch than lie low and be out of the fun? A crutch. The image lingers. It's a stark reminder that this game could leave you wounded, maimed, or worse. Now, the poem brushes past this, suggesting that even returning injured is better than not participating at all. But that thought starts to take root. What does it truly mean to come back with a crutch? What could be the real cost of this adventure? In that moment, that initial surge of pride and purpose becomes tinged with uncertainty. The poem speaks directly to you. It makes the idea of enlisting seem not only honourable but exhilarating. Yet, beneath those rousing words lies a reality far more complex and harrowing. Hello, and welcome to this special edition of Study Sessions. This episode is going to focus on the Jessie Pope poem Who's for the Game, and it is, of course, designed for Year 9 students preparing for their end-of-year exams. In fact, this episode ties directly into the exam preparation booklet, specifically week 11 and also the practice comparison task later on as well. Now, the purpose of the episode is to look at the poem's title and then a series of key quotations across the course of this poem. The idea in the exam is that you may wish to compare this poem, Who's for the Game, to one of the other conflicts poems that you've studied this half term with your English teacher. The best place to start, of course, is by hearing the poem in its entirety. So I'm going to read the poem for you now. So this is Who's for the Game by Jessie Pope. Who's for the game, the biggest that's played, the red crashing game of a fight? Who'll grip and tackle the job unafraid, and who thinks he'd rather sit tight? Who'll toe the line for the signal to go? Who'll give his country a hand? Who wants a turn to himself in the show? And who wants a seat in the stand? Who knows it won't be a picnic, not much, yet eagerly shoulders a gun? Who would much rather come back with a crutch than lie low and be out of the fun? Come along, lads, but you'll come on all right, for there's only one course to pursue. Your country is up to her neck in a fight, and she's looking and calling for you. So we're going to start with the title of the poem, Who's for the Game? And of course, the title's really important because it immediately positions the poem within the realm of challenge and competition. The use of that word, game, war as a game, trivializes the seriousness or the gravity of war, and it frames war, metaphorically, as a kind of sport or pastime. It's a metaphor that is enticing. It entices young men by appealing to their sense of adventure, their sense of camaraderie, the things that are very common in sports. By posing the title as a question, Pope is directly engaging the reader, specifically, I think, young men. It's really aimed at young men in lots of ways, creating a sense of interaction and a persuasion between author and reader. It implies a choice, as in, who's for the game? Do you want to take part in the game of war? So there's that implicit suggestion of choice. And yet, of course, like any effective question with rhetorical force, it subtly pressures the reader to align themselves, those young men reading the poem, to align themselves with the implied courage, valor, and indeed masculinity of participating in war. So it's a really, really effective title, and we must be paying attention to it in our analysis in the end of year assessment, end of year exam. Now, I want to start with the opening lines of the poem. We're just going to go through 3 quotations, as you would in the actual exam itself. We're going to start with those opening lines. Who's for the game? The biggest that's played. The red, crashing game of a fight. So, these lines set the tone of the poem. War is the ultimate game. Now, that adjective, the superlative, biggest, amplifies the stakes, that sense of if you aren't part of this game, the biggest that's ever been played, you'll be missing out. It's playing on almost those fears of missing out. While that red crashing imagery evokes both a sense of excitement and movement, but also red, obviously alluding to, albeit briefly and rather euphemistically, the bloodshed of battle. So the juxtaposition in those opening 2 lines of imagery around a game, the biggest that's been played, with the violent undertones of red crashing, that strange juxtaposition captures really, I think, the central kind of difficulty or challenge of this poem, which is encouraging young men to sign up and yet at least having to nod in the direction or allude to the dangers of the conflict itself. But overall, there is this sense of war being presented in a very glamorous way. We might say that Jessie Pope glamorizes the conflict and serves, red crashing. That is not the gory detail of death and destruction and the impact of war on human bodies that we get, for example, in something like Dulce et Decorum Est. So we are already in the world of euphemism and the idea that the true horrors of war, which, to be fair to Jessie Pope, weren't absolutely abundantly obvious to everyone from the vantage point of 1915 when this poem was written. They weren't obvious, and people didn't grasp just what industrialized modern warfare truly looked like in 1915, obviously in World War I. That would become abundantly apparent later on over the course of the First World War. But there is still this sense of horror, the violence of war being euphemistically masked. We're going to move on to some of the middle lines. Again, we're not going to be talking about every single aspect of the poem, just starting with those middle lines in this episode. Who knows it won't be a picnic? Not much, yet eagerly shoulders a gun. Now, here, Pope is acknowledging the dangers. It won't be a picnic. Then we've got the employment of understatement. It won't be a picnic, this idiomatic phrase, okay? It serves to downplay, however, those dangers, as in, it won't be a picnic, and then that's not much, it's downplaying it. And the overall tone is very colloquial, very everyday language, accessible, and sort of light-hearted, almost playful, obviously linking into this idea of war itself being a game. The phrase eagerly shoulders a gun. Think about that word eagerly, willingly, with enthusiasm, with excitement, not reluctantly shoulders a gun, but eagerly shoulders a gun. It's all about enthusiasm, but also readiness, kind of preparedness, reinforcing the idea that true men embrace challenge, the challenges of war. They shoulder a gun eagerly, not with reluctance, and they're prepared to face the challenges of war despite all of the potential hardships. Potential hardships and, of course, the violence that is, again, alluded to, although not directly stated, to the reference to the word gun. And we turn now to the concluding lines of the poem. Come along, lads, but you'll come on all right, for there's only one course to pursue. Your country is up to her neck in a fight, and she's looking and calling for you. Now, these closing lines are a direct call to action. Come along, lads, is an informal, friendly invitation, while you'll come on all right, again, direct address, reassures the reader of their safety and success. And then think about the personification of one's country, okay, Britain in this case, as a woman, looking and calling. Your country is up to her neck in a fight, not your country is up to its neck, and she's looking and calling for you, not and it's looking and calling for you. So we've got personification of the country, but this gendered, very specific gendered personification, looking and calling the country is, as if the country is a kind of desperate woman, playing on those very traditional, stereotypical notions of male chivalry, male protection of, obviously, as a stereotype runs, a weak and in need of protection, vulnerable woman. Okay, all of this is absolutely dripping with pathos, dripping with this emotional appeal, conveying that sense of duty to protect one's homeland as one would feel a duty as a man to protect one's mother or protect one's wife or so on. Okay, so the gendered language is also very, very important, playing on the readers, particularly if obviously they're young men thinking of signing up, playing on that sense of masculinity and all of the roles and duties and expectations, societal expectations that one would associate with masculinity, particularly in 1915. So Jessie Pope's poem then, in conclusion, Who's for the Game, is a real masterclass in persuasive, propagandizing wartime poetry. There is very, very purposeful, strategic language and metaphor, that metaphor of war as a game, because the poem has a clear purpose. It is to rally young men to the front lines by framing, recasting war as an honourable and indeed exhilarating endeavour. And yet, if we read against the grain, we might say, if we push back on this poem, if we resist the attempt to read it as the poem perhaps wants to be read, beneath the rousing verses lies actually quite a complex interplay of both idealism, very, very idealized, romanticized depictions of war, and also some manipulation, effectively. Okay, and this is clearly reflective of the broader propaganda efforts of the era. So lots to be thinking about here. Very, very important poem. When we come to Who's for the Game, we tend to read this poem in conversation with or in contrast with Dulce Decorum Est. Okay, and that's understandable. I suppose if we are to try to be fair to Jessie Pope, this poem is written in 1915, where the true extent of the horrors of World War I were perhaps not as apparent as they certainly were by 1916, 17, and 18. So we can maybe there's a little bit of sympathy that we might have for Jessie Pope, but this poem is in some ways kind of overshadowed by Dulce et Decorum Est. And it's hard to overstate how transformative Dulce is in shaping our understanding of war and also war poetry. Okay, so we need to be thinking about the way that we now understand war poetry as exploring the horrors of war, the truth of war, the experience of war. You know, a poem like The Manhunt probably doesn't get written in some ways without a poem like Dulce. That idea of, I'm going to examine the true cost and horrors of war, whether that's for soldiers, obviously on the front line in Dulce, or indeed for the wife or partner of a soldier returning broken and damaged physically and psychologically from war. That idea, the idea that war poetry can do that and show us that, is very much existing in a sort of post-Dulce et Decorum Est world, whereas Jessie Pope feels a little bit like a time capsule, a time when poetry about war could be full of idealism, could be valorizing and romanticizing war itself. So we need to bear that in mind, and obviously this poem, the Jessie Pope one, Who's for the Game, and the other poems I've mentioned, very, very strikingly different, and obviously writ in terms of moments of comparison and, of course, crucially, contrast. So I hope that this has been a really useful episode. This is an episode that will help you with week 11 and beyond in the exam preparation. But of course, the real purpose of the episode is to prepare you for your end of year exam. So I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope it's been helpful. Do make sure you give me some feedback on the episodes and how we can make them more helpful for you in future. And I'll see you on the next one.